Securing your screen at this time is a reminder that this advisor webcast is intended for informational purposes only. Any features or functionality described for Oracle's products remains at the sole discretion of Oracle. Now, let's get started with our presentation. Walter, if you're ready, I'll turn the webcast over to you, and you can begin.
Yes, thank you, Pam. As Pam said, I'm Walter Floyd. My role at Siebel is I am in the technical support area. So giving webinars is not my first line of work, so y'all bear with me as we go through this. So this is on scripting best practices and tips, and we will jump right in. There's a lot of information I want to cover, so we're going to jump right in and move right along. What we're going to try and cover today is I'm going to share with you where you may can find some documents of interest. One in particular would be the scripting best practices document, but I'm going to show you where those are. We're going to go over some general information about scripting. Then I'm going to share with you what an event is, how, the order that events fire and how they're used in this. We're going to talk briefly about business services. We're going to talk a little bit about Siebel tools and recognizing, finding scripts and recognizing some of the different things within Siebel tools that relate to scripting. We're going to have some discussions regarding debugging scripts and some mechanisms and tools you may could use to help you figure out what's going on when you have scripting in place or when you're adding scripting. And then we're going to do a real quick example script, just a very simple one to just add a button to a screen and put a little bit of scripting around and call a business service, just a few simple things, just a little bit of an example of what's going on. And then we'll follow that up with some information Lance is going to present on other training and other information to be available, and then we'll have a Q&A session. Okay, so moving right along, the documents that are available that will be useful to you is, again, this main document that talks about scripting best practices. This is a fairly short document when you go and look at it, but if you look closely, you'll find that there's a linked PDF within the document. If you download, if you click on that link and get the download of that PDF, you will find it is a pretty large PDF that has a great deal of information about what to-dos and not-to-dos in scripting. What my suggestion would be for this document would be to, before you, as soon as you can, review that document, look at what's in it. My guess is that a lot of it may not make sense, some of it will. I would suggest that you look at it and then several months from now look again, that it ought to be a document that you go through and reread several times as you work more and more with scripts, and you will get more and more out of it, I believe. It is a very good document. I did want to point out that there is a section there about destroying objects, and that's something that's very related to scripting that can cause you issues if you don't do this. So you need to read and understand about destroying documents. We'll talk about it a little bit more in the presentation. Like I said, we're going over a lot of things briefly here, so we won't go into a lot of depth about it. But destroying objects is very important to make sure you free up the resources on the system so that you don't cause problems along the way. So I would definitely make sure you understand what needs to be destroyed and what doesn't, and an appropriate way to destroy objects when you're using scripting. One of the other documents that you'll find that I think is very useful is the document accessing UI context and non-UI context. What this explains is that when you're in the user interface, when the user is using the user interface, the underlying objects, business object, business components, those underlying objects that are used to paint the UI are considered in UI context. So in scripting, if you access these same objects, you are impacting what's going on the UI that the user is seeing. So there are certainly times where you want to be able to do that, to interact with what to what the user is seeing, you're trying to interact with that. There's also times when you want to gather information that you don't want to interfere with what the UI is doing. So then you need to use non-UI context, which is getting a second instance or a different instance of different objects that are available to you. So again, this is just I think you need to read this and understand it. I think it allows you much better to understand what you should be using when you're using scripts and as far as which objects you use. Next resource is the bookshelf. There's 3 different manuals that are of real use. So the main ones I've used in scripting is the Siebel Object Interfaces reference is the first one. Now, when you're dealing with scripting, you interact with Siebel through objects, a business object, business components, all those business services, all those are different objects that are defined. And everything, when you're in tools, everything you look at is a different object. And so what this reference tells you is it gives you all the information of interacting with the object model from Siebel. So it tells you what events are fired for each different object, what methods are available for you to execute through scripting for each different object. So it's a vital resource that you can use for figuring out what's available for you to work against and where you can place things when you're working with the Siebel objects. The next item is the eScript language reference. Now, the language reference this is where the object interfaces is talking about how to interact with Siebel. This is more technically about how the syntax within the eScript language itself, and also for the VB language. Now, this presentation, we're going to really be just looking at the eScript, just because that's the more commonly used one. So we want, but everything that's said here, even though it has a different syntax, would apply for the VB language also that's available through Siebel. But so this is just about the syntax and available commands that you can use within each of those languages, and both very useful. Okay, the next slide, some general information. If you've worked with script very much and had to deal with SRs and all, tech support frequently tells you to comment out scripting code so you can see if the scripting is actually contributing to a particular problem or not. So I wanted to touch base a little bit about the different mechanisms you can use to comment out scripting. Normally when tech support is asking you to do it, they'll direct you to comment out the config files, comment out the enabled scripting, set it to false. This is especially applicable when you're working in a client against a local database or a server database, when you're working in development, which is what you would normally be doing, I believe. But you can, you set this enable scripting to false, and it'll bypass all the server scripts that are built in, that are compiled for the SRF. So that's a main way that you do it. That's a good way to turn off scripting so you can see if it's impacting what you're trying to accomplish when you're having problems. Now, do note that does not cut off browser scripting. A brief note about browser scripting. There's really not time to get into browser scripting in this presentation. So I'll mention it a few times where I think it's real important, but normally, browser scripts is more involved than we are going to cover here. So just be aware they're there, and be aware that when you disable the scripting through the config file, it is not turning off the browser scripts. The other way that you can turn off scripting is you can comment individual lines of code using the single quote in VB or using a / in eScript. So you can comment individual lines out to skip them, or you can activate the script itself in tools when you're looking at the objects of the scripting object. You can inactivate it, and that will cause it to not be executed. So those are different ways that you can turn scripting off on a global or individual basis when you're wanting to see if it's impacting anything. As I mentioned earlier, destroying objects is a pretty important thing that you need to do, and I still go back to you need to read the best practices about doing that. I did want to just point out that the types of objects that need to be destroyed are COM objects, property sets, business services, business components, and business objects. Those are the ones that need to be destroyed after you create them. After you instantiate them, they need to be destroyed after the fact. So So just let you know, it's not everything you do in scripting, but each of those needs to be destroyed after they are used, after you've completed using them. Okay, moving to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about what an event is. So when you're doing scripting, you're customizing what is the normal flow of things through Siebel. And what an event is that it is the location in which you can add custom scripting. It is the only location that you can add custom scripting at the server side. So events are predefined locations within the Siebel process where you can add code. That's more or less what an event is, and there's a lot of them that are documented in the interfaces manual that I pointed out. So that's what an event is. It's different places where you can put code. Now there's a cancel operation and continue operation. These are some predefined variables that are used as, it's actually a Boolean true or false, but these are used to control the flow when a script is executing. And a cancel operation, and we'll look at this on the next slide. We'll talk about the sequence of events. But the cancel operation, what it does is it signals to the process that's happening. It signals to stop bubbling forward, to stop the process at this point and do not execute anymore for this particular method. It is the cancel operation, continue operation is very related to the methods you're going through. So either a method that you're added through adding a custom button, say, or even what is happening through when you do a save, when you do the vanilla capabilities. That when you do a save, it ends up generating a write record method. So if you put a cancel operation in a pre-invoke method on the write record, it will prevent Siebel from writing the record. It cancels that operation and returns back to the UI. Continue operation, as you would expect, does the opposite. It says continue on with the process. And we'll talk about this in more detail. The next slide will go into more detail about that is how you can use those return values to control the method going through the different events that are being fired. I want to do a brief point out about the pre-can invoke method event. A pre-can invoke method this is on all applets, and this pre-can invoke method is an event that's set up so that you can enable and disable controls within the applet. Controls being buttons or different controls that are built to handle the UI navigation and stuff. So the pre-can invoke method, when every time a screen is refreshed, the pre-can invoke method event fires for every control that is on the view. And so, since it's limited to an applet, so you would be looking at it within an applet. But so the pre-can invoke method is an event that will fire, it can fire 20, 30, 40 times right back to back when the screen is being refreshed. Because it's hit so hard doing this, you need to try and limit using this event to just disabling and enabling the controls. And there are some limited times where you may try and do some other things in there, but as a rule, you should try and limit the code that's in here to just controlling what's being enabled and disabled on your buttons. And you'll see when we go through it, it fires over and over again, so it's harder to debug. The more stuff you have in there, it goes through this a lot, and so it can impact performance if you put very much code in here. That's to be avoided. Okay, next slide. This is when a method is fired. So when you hit a button on the screen or you take an action that triggers a method being fired, the events that fire for that method have a certain order that it goes through. So the firing order would be that, so you push a save button on the UI. The first thing will happen is the applet pre-invoke method event will fire. Now this is on the browser side. So this is the you have a chance to execute browser scripts here. And you would have a chance to do a cancel operation here, which would prevent anything from bubbling forward. I call this bubbling up the event ladder. So it starts off here with a pre-invoke method on the browser. Once it finishes that and you get a continue operation, the next it goes to the server next, and then you get the pre-invoke method on the server, which is called web applet pre-invoke method. So that is the next event that fires in the chain. After that one completes, then it goes to the business component pre-invoke method. Okay, after the business component pre-invoke method event fires, then if it is a built-in method that's firing, like write record, at that point, the internal execution of the method happens. The Siebel C++ code is executed. So, in each of these events that fire beforehand, you had the opportunity of doing cancel operation. If you, for some reason, through scripting, you determined that you did not want that operation to happen, you would do cancel operation, and then this step gets skipped. On the other hand, if this is a custom method, if you've added like we're going to do, we're going to add a test method. When you add a test method to a button and you fire it, if the event bubbles up, if the method bubbles up to here, to the business component, this is actually the business component trying to execute the code. If it gets up to here and did not get a cancel operation along the way, you will get an error saying that this method is not recognized. Because this is a custom method, this method would not be found in the Siebel C++ code. It would search for that method, not find it, and then send you back an error saying that this method doesn't exist for this business component. So what that's telling you, anytime you see that, what that's telling you is that you did not do a cancel operation, or that cancel operation did not get executed for some reason in one of these previous events. So, and that happens commonly. You'll see that a lot, but that's what that means when you see that. So then after the C++ code executes, then it bubbles back down towards the browser, and it does the business component invoke method. Now note the pre-invoke methods all fire before the actual work is done by Siebel, if it's a vanilla method. And then the invoke methods all fire after the case. So these, if there was a write record, the record being written to the database at this point. So all of this happens before it was written to the record, written to the database. It gets written to the database, and then we have locations at the BizComp web applet and applet level to write code after the update took place. The general best practices are that if you're in the pre-area, you're mainly working with UI context objects. This is, you want to, you're working, this is before you update the database, so you're doing edits here, you're doing other interaction with other information on that same business component. Normally, the best practice would be that if you, the code that's in these, and these are not used nearly as much. The invoke methods are very rarely used compared to the pre-invoke. But if you're putting code here, this would be normally that after the database is updated, if you wanted to write some script to do some other action to some data that's not on the UI, this would be most likely where you would put it, because you want to make sure it's already committed to the database before you take the action of adding that field to some other business component or something. So these are, this is more after the fact, and excuse me, and so just keep that in mind. Again, if you read the best practices document, it will mention that. Okay, on the next slide, same type of thing when a field value changes. When the UI gets changed for a particular field, when you step out of that field, that triggers an event in the browser, and the applet change field value is executed. Now this, again, if you were doing an edit that you wanted to do through scripting, that you didn't want to have the traffic to go to the server and back, you could put it here to do that kind of an edit. So this fires every time you step out of a field. This event fires for that particular field. Then you've got a BizComp preset field value on the browser. Again, this was on the applet level. Now, so in looking at this, you've got, and as you saw before, you've got applet level, then you've got applet level at the browser, applet level at the server, and then BizComp level. Each of those, you decide where you put your script in there based on what, how wide an impact you want it to be. If you're writing applet level scripts, then you're going to impact the flow of the process when an applet is being used. Business components can be updated outside of an applet also. So if you need to put in some check that's for every time this business component is ever updated from anywhere, then you would put the code at the business component level. If you're trying to only impact the process when they're coming through a particular applet, then you would be more likely to want to put the code in the applet itself and not at the BizComp. So, you need those deciding where you're going to put your code impacts on how wide of an audience you need that code to impact. So the second, after the field value changes on the browser, preset field value executes. Now again, that executes upon stepping out of the field. On the server side, there is also a BizComp preset field value. That event fires after the field is being updated, but the way that the hierarchy, the way that Siebel is set up, is that there's not a trip when you are changing things on the UI. It does not make a round trip to the server every field you change. So you may fire 4 fields and they have preset field value on the browser, preset field value on the browser fire as you're changing to those fields, but it may not go to the server until a save record is done. When a save record is done, then the preset field value on the server side will fire 4 times, once for each of those fields. And so you just need to be aware that this is firing at the time that you're stepping out of the field. These may not be firing until later when you save the record, or if you have one of those fields is set to post immediate. Post immediate causes a round trip to the server, and so any fields that have been updated since the last round trip to the server will be sent then. So these are, these kind of stack up. Even though these are the order that things happen, they don't always happen, in the exact order because of the traffic going back and forth to the server. So after the preset field value on the server fires, then you get the value actually gets changed within the memory for the PC. Now this is a set field value. This is not writing a record. So when Siebel gets this, when it bubbles up to the business component and there's been no cancel operation done, Siebel will go and modify the memory of that business component on the server and save that value into the memory, but it does not write it to the database yet. Then after that's completed, then there's only one set field value that's going to be on its way back. That's on the server. We don't have this. These two don't have a trip back to the browser side for putting code. It's only on the server side is the only place where you could do the set field value side of this. Okay, moving right along to business services. Business service is a place where you can put code that you're going to execute from different places. So reusable code is what you could use a business service to put several different functions in it and then call it from different places. You can call business services from runtime events, workflows, or from scripting. So if you have a set of processes that you want to do over and over again, one recommendation would be rather than putting it in different places and different applets and different business components, you could write a business service and just call that business service. There are several different types of business services. There is client-side business services and there are runtime business services. Runtime business service and client-side business service, same thing. And then there are built-in business services. The difference is a built-in business service is a business service that is compiled into the SRF. So it's in tools, existing tools. It could be a vanilla. There's 2 different kinds. There are ones that you write, or there are ones that are vanilla. When you go and look at the business services and tools, there's hundreds of business services out there that have been written by Siebel, that are used by Siebel. Then you can also write your own using the CSS service class, and these will be customized business services that you can use. Both of these kinds are compiled into the SRF and stored in repository. Then there's also runtime business services. Runtime business services are created in the client, are stored in the application database, are not part of the SRF, or not in tools at all, but can be executed as if they were. So you don't have to redeploy the SRF to use runtime business services. They're just data within the database that can be executed when needed. Note that if you have the same business service defined as a built-in business service and a runtime business service, the runtime business service is ignored, and it will use the SRF. So it searches first in the repository for a business service when it comes time to execute it. If it finds it, it doesn't look any further, it executes it. So if you're using runtime business services, take care in how you name them so that it's not, so that it's not the same name as something that already exists, or you don't have the same name at both places, because it will ignore the runtime at that point. Okay, a little bit of scripting here. There's a business service. This is just a script that you could use to call a business service from script. You can see that it uses the application, which is the object name for that's to get to the methods that are on the object. So this is calling the application object and a get service method, and passing a parameter of AA test BS. So this is going to create the OBS variable will point to the AA test business service. Then the next thing is, when they're calling a business service, you need to have a property set that you pass as an input and a property set that can get output from the business service by default. You need to pass these in. You don't necessarily have to use them, but if you wanted to pass a variable into the business service to act on, you would use the input property set. If information was coming back from the business service, you would use the output property set. So you define these, and then you would, on that business service that you identified, you would invoke method, which is a method on the business service object, and tell it that you want to execute a particular method on this business service and pass in the property sets. Now, you know what property sets are. They're fairly complex. It's a hierarchical mechanism to store data. So you can use it very simply, just to put a value pair in there of a field of a value name and the data that goes with it, or you can set up a very complex hierarchy. It's very similar to setting up like an XML type relationship. So, and the property sets, again, is way out of the scope of what we're doing here, but you have to use them when you're communicating with a business service. And then in this script, you can see after it invokes this method, you can see that we're cleaning up and destroying the objects that we created. The two property sets and the business service were on the list of things that we had to destroy. So this is in eScript. This is how you would go about destroying. On the next slide, we've got example code of how you would build a very simple business service. So, and I'm going to start here on the second thing in the pre-can invoke method. Again, this like on the applet, this is used to enable the method that you're trying to add. So we're just adding code here that says when the pre-can invoke method event fires, that if the method name is AA test BS method, then we're going to say that it is invocable, and then we're going to do a cancel operation so it doesn't go any further. You would have in your pre-can invoke every different method that you want to be used in this business service. You would define it here and duplicate the same kind of code. And then in the pre-invoke method event, this is where the code will be. This is what gets executed when you're calling a business service. So in the previous example where we showed it being calling this method, what happens is it comes in, it checks to see if this method name is the one that's being called. And this we're just doing a simple raise error text with, so you would put any logic you wanted to execute when you called this business service would go in here, and then at the end you would do a cancel operation to to send the processing back to where it was called from. Now, note, the best practice would not be to do this exactly. This is a very simple example. The best practice would be that in this right here, you would call a function in the business service and let all the processing be done in that function, so that you have the pre-invoke method is just very clean and just goes, if it's this business service, execute this function. If it's this method, invoke that function. If it's that method, invoke that function. So this is the pre-invoke method does not have a lot of logic in it. Would be the best practice. It would be, in very simplest cases like this, you would not need to do that. But if you had very much logic involved, you would want to use a function to have all of your logic in, and it would just be, the pre-invoke method would just be a way of calling up getting access to that function. Okay, I just want to talk a little bit about tools itself. So when you're looking at tools, the first thing we're going to look at is looking at where the scripts are in tools and understanding what the script icon is. So I'm going to switch over and look at my tools environment. So we are in a tools that I've already got open. I'm in version 8.1. And so I'm going to run a query and bring back what I've already changed in here some. And we're going to look at the service request list applet. So this is an applet that's already got some scripting on it. So if I expand the objects and look at the script objects, you can see this is the scripts that are already existing in this applet. And this is where I'm talking about you can inactivate them. This is one way you can inactivate them and activate them. Fly here quickly the tile so that you can turn them off if you needed to. Okay, so we're going to look at the scripts that are on this business service, on this applet. We're going to right-click and do Edit Server Scripts. This will bring up the scripts that are here for this applet. This applet. And you'll see the ones I talked about, the pre-invoke method, the pre-can invoke method. There's also some others that I haven't mentioned. The load, which is very useful. Anytime this applet gets loaded, this gets executed. So you can put in some preliminary processing at that point. But what I want to point out at this point is that if you look at these icons, you see 3 of the icons have little lines in them, and 3 of them are grayed out. What this is telling you is that the ones with the little lines on them means that it has been scripted. It has been modified from the original setting. And then the ones that are gray, this is the default code that comes in the event right out of the box. So the ones that are gray have never been modified. So I'm going to show you this. We're going to go here. I'm going to put in a space and step out of this. And you're going to see now that one's been changed. So now it shows that icon. So you can tell which ones have been changed. So another best practice is that if you have modified an event but have not, there's no code left in there, rather than leaving it commented out or like I did where it's just a space but really no code that's being executed, what you would want to do is if you delete the entire set of code and then step off of that event. Now this will take a little while because this is the first time it's doing it, but what it's doing now is it's going back and reading the database to find out what the default values are that should be in that show control event. It's going and pulling that out of the database and going to replace, since I left nothing there, it's going to rebuild that default event. So now you can see that it's finished. So we go back and look at it, it's back the way it was, but now it's gray again. So what this does is, if you clean it up that way, when you don't have any code left that's executing in it, it means that it doesn't try to compile this. It's a cleaner process to leave them like this, rather than leave them all commented out with nothing actually executing in it. Okay, let's see, going back to the presentation. Okay, I wanted to show you the help. Let's go back and look at tools again. In the tools, I had mentioned some of the documentation that's available. If you go and click on this help up here and go to contents in tools, it brings up a list of content for this version that is available to you straight within tools. Now, this is very useful. You can see that, right there is one of the manuals, the VB and the eScript language. Those are the three that I talked about. And then you've got these others that have useful information. But you can, but you can go in here and look up information without having to go and research it and find it. So if you wanted to, say you wanted to see that, what application methods are available. These are, for the application object, all of these methods are available to be executed. If you want to look at the application events, these are the events, and you can look at them and it tells you what they do, what's best there, and it's just a useful mechanism to go and gather information about the, straight out of ebooks. So just be aware that's there. Another thing I wanted you to be aware of is two things. There's, when you're debugging, if you see this line of tools right here, this is the debugging tool. So if I right-click in this area and turn on and off debug, you can see it adds those. So those are your debugging tools. So if you want to start the debugger, the play button starts, it stops it. You can jump over code, jump over. You use this when you're debugging code, but that's how you can bring it up. Those same options are available here under the debug menu item also. So be aware of that. And then under the view, there is an options, and then there's a scripting tab. I'm going to discuss this a little bit. With this, you can set some variables, some system-wide variables for scripting that are useful to you. You can set what language you're going to use. If you're going to use VB or eScript, you can set that, and the next time you open a event to add scripting, it will come out with that, in that format. I also wanted to note, again, we're not going to talk much about browser scripting, but there's a place here where you can put your browser script compilation folder. What this does, this allows you that if you're changing browser scripts, it allows you to do incremental browser compiles. So it'll add whatever changes you made for whatever object you're compiling. It'll go back and add it to this folder and make it available without having to do a Gen B. So it's just a time saver thing for when you're making little browser script changes. You can, if you add this folder in here, it will automatically roll those changes out and you don't have to do a Gen B. Again, that's for web client. If you're working in a thin client, for thick client, if you're working in a thin client, you still have to go through the step of getting those changes over to the web server, of course. Okay, the other thing I wanted to mention about this is there's a field here, the engine settings for deduce types. What the deduce types does is in version 8.0 and forward, default engine is the ST scripting engine, which is strong typed. So deduce types, when you're using the strong type engine, ST engine, it will look at how you're using a particular variable and try to deduce what that type is and set it, which is a great feature and it's useful. But what we have found is if you're upgrading from earlier versions that are from the old T scripting engine and trying to use that same code in later versions where it uses the ST scripting engine, sometimes the type that it sets, it causes compile problems. So if you're upgrading, and if you already have a lot of existing code and you're upgrading, and you're having compile issues, you can turn the deduce types off. It won't do that, and then it's much more compatible with the older code that you have. So just be aware that's there, and if you're coming up from old versions that have a lot of scripting, I would recommend turning the deduce types off. You can always leave it on, but you may have to fix a lot of things so that it will not have compile issues. Okay, that's all I'm going to mention here. I will just show you that on the debug, I've already set this up so that the debugger is set up to open a client if I start the debugger. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. So, and that's just those are the things that I've shown you on here. So we're going to go to the next slide. And we're going to talk a little bit about debugging capability. We're going to look at the debugger itself a little bit. When we go through the example, the debugger allows you to stop, to set breakpoints and step through code. So that's an available tool that I use a lot and find it very useful. But it is, there are some difficulties with it also. Sometimes it's, you've got to make sure that the database version of your objects match the SRF version. So if they're out of sync, then if using an SRF that's not an immediate compile from your database, then it's easy for it to, if there's been change, one's changing on the other, they'll get out of sync and stepping through the code just won't work the way you expect it. Puts the wrong line of code, it's just not smart to figure that out. So you just have to make sure that your database and your SRF is in sync if you want to use a debugger. Another option is to use trace statements. What the trace statement does is it allows you to write to a file information as you're going through your script. So, and the way it's used is you turn on tracing by using the trace on, and you can trace after the trace is on, it just writes a message straight to your log file, to the tracing log file. And then when you're through, you turn tracing back off. A couple of things of note. If you note here on the example where I'm doing it in script, I've got an empty quoted string here for the file name option of the trace on. If you leave that empty, what that does is it adds all of the tracing statements that are generated from turning trace on this way. It adds that to your object manager log or your Siebel log file if you're in thick client. It adds this into your existing log file, which I find useful because then you can use the other information in your log file also as you're doing this. The other option would be you can put a file name in there, and it'll just write these log statements to the file name. It won't go to your object manager or Siebel log. So it just depends on what you need. There's two different types. There's SQL allocation, so that if you tell it if you want to trace allocations, and anytime scripting adds any instantiates any objects or anything, it updates the trace of those being updated. And then you can do your selection. You can do all or just scripting, so that it shows you can limit it to where it's only doing the objects that are created from scripting or from any activity. The trace is used where you can put. This is just putting out a line of information straight into your output file. So in this case, we're just going to say the method name, and then we're going to concatenate the method name that came in the parameter into the pre-invoke method. So this would be an example of a trace where you could, if you wanted to know what different methods were being fired in an applet. I'm sorry, this is not an example of an applet, but for an applet, you could put this code in there, and then it would add to your log every method name that's being fired. So if you don't know, if you don't know if it's doing a write record or an explicit write, you can put this in there, and it would write it out in the log what the method name was. And then you can see down here we cut it off. So this is just an example of how you could implement trace and what of how you can use it. There's also, similarly, you can write files straight using just Siebel eScript. You can write files directly to a file, write information directly to a file just by using the clib fopen and fput.s. What this does, this uses the operating system's C library. So this is operating system specific. It may act a little bit differently between if you're on Unix or if you're on Windows, but it gives you the C library, gives you the functions available. And this, again, in the manual for eScript, these are all documented. There's a whole lot of different C library functions available for you. And you can use those so that you can write a file here. You can append you can open this file and append data to it. So it's just another way that you can track information using this tool as you're processing code. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is just a simple demonstration. So we're going to go back over to Tools. And you will see what I do is I have a file set up, and this will be if you download this presentation, when you get it, this file should be available to you also. And what I've done is put just some little snippets of code that I frequently use over and over again. And what I recommend doing is you have a file like this. If you're going to be pursuing scripting, so you have a file like this, and when you find interesting or useful ways of doing something that works, is you make a copy of it to use in the future. I find that it's much easier to reuse something that I've written before that I know works. It's much easier to start with that than it is to try and figure out how to do it every time from scratch. So that's what I'm going to be using now to set this up. So I've got this little file, like I said, and you'll get a copy of it. What I'm going to do is, close these, and what we're going to do is, first thing we're going to do is create a business service. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to do a Control-N to create a new record, and I'm going to create a business service called AA Test BS. I'm going to select a project that I've already got open, service. Okay, so we're going to create this business service. Now, on this business service, I'm going to go and add a method. So I'm going to add a method that can be used. Again, I'm going to do a Control-N key, put in AA Test BS method 1. Okay, so what this does, I'm going to save that. It's not required that you put these methods in there when you create a business service, but if you do put them in there, it becomes useful because then these values can be searched on when you're in a simulator or if you're in a workflow and you want to put in that business service and you want to know what methods are available. It'll show up in the drop down if it's in this list. If it's not, it won't. Okay, so we've got that added there. We're going to go into the business service and we're going to edit the server script. We're going to start with the pre-can invoke method, and we're going to come over here and just get a copy of the pre-can invoke stuff that I've got set up for generic use, and I'm going to add it right there. Now, the method name we used was AA Test BS method 1. So we're going to set that up, and so now we've set that up. We're going to go over to the pre-invoke, and I'm going to add the code for pre-invoke method. So we add the code, so again, the method name is coming in, AA Test BS method 1. Did I do that right down there? Yep. Okay, so we got that coming in, and you can see now I left a comment here, this is where the script will go. So what we're going to do in this script is I'm just going to add, I've got a copy of tracing stuff, so I'm going to add some tracing here so that we can show that we're going to executing this code. So I'm going to say I'm going to turn trace on, start trace, I'm going to get rid of this. So it's just something to show up in the log that we're doing. So you can see I'm writing it to the log that's being generated already. Then we're going to cut it off. And that's really all we're going to do in here. Just a little simple little business service that doesn't do much. I'm going to save it. And I'm going to go and compile it. I'm going to do incremental compile. It'll take a moment, mainly because it's got to bounce the client that I've already got open. And the next step we're going to do is we're going to go over to the applet. We're going to go work with the service request detail applet. And I'm going to add a button. So we're going to go to applets. And sorry about my typing noise there. But I'm going to bring that up. We're going to add a button to this applet. So I'm going to go to the Edit Web Layout. Okay, so we're going to go, we want to put this on the edit template. So we're going to go over here, and we're just going to add a mini button. I'm going to add it right there between new and delete. So bringing up my client over there. Okay, so we added this button here. I'm going to go to the properties. Sorry for all this jumping around. I'm going to go to the properties, and I'm going to give it a name of AA test. I'm going to have it invoke method AA test, and I'm going to name the button AA test. Okay, so it gives us the button up there. We've added it, so I'm going to get out of that. So now we've got a button added to the detailed applet on the service request. Now I'm going to go and add some server scripts. So the first thing we're going to do is we want to enable the button. So we do that, as I mentioned before, we do that with the pre-can invoke code. So we're going to add that there. So now AA test comes in and it'll be enabled. And then we're going to add a place to add some script. So in the pre-invoke method, which this will bubble up to this, we're going to say when the AA test method comes into the pre-invoke event, we're going to execute this script. Now, what we're going to try and do with this script is I've got some code in here that I showed you earlier for kicking off a business service. So we're going to take that code and we're going to add it here. So we're going to do a get service of AA test BS, which just has to be the same one that was created. We're going to build our two property sets, and then we're going to call the AA test BSMS. I believe we've got one. That's what I put on there. So we're going to call that business service, and then we're going to destroy everything after we finish. Now we're going to do one more thing. Let's add some, let's put some, where did I put it? Let's put some tracing in here also, so we can see it's really a bunch of traces that goes through here. So I'm going to add tracing up to the beginning of this, and we'll turn the trace off right down here after we sync everything up. So we're going to, again, turn trace on to the same log file. Now, the way tracing works is as long as you're using the same log file, you can turn it on multiple times. And it's just opening the same trace. So it recognizes that I've already, it's going to actually fire this trace on twice while we run this process, once here and once in the business service. But since it's already open, it won't do anything except for add to it. If I wanted to track SQL also, what I would need to do is do the same thing like that. And now it would turn on allocations and SQL tracking into this same log file. So we're not going to do that, but that's what we're trying. I wanted to use both. I wanted both allocations and SQL traced. That's what I would do that. Let's see, we're going to get rid of this one because we don't use that field. Get rid of that line since I copied it. And we'll put this down to just before this. Okay, so we've got this set up. So now when we call this press this button, it's going to call the business service and should be writing to the trace file. Okay, I'm going to close this and do another compile. Get those changes in place. While that's restarting the client, I'm going to close this. In the later version, vanilla gets distributed with some scripting in it, in this business service, and it keeps coming up as it's being executed. I don't know what it does, but it's got code that goes out in vanilla. It's not something I added. It's just something that comes out, and so you'll see that. But what I'm going to explain is, okay, when you can see that I've got no script open. I've got no objects open. I'm just sitting on the applet list. As the client starts, if any scripting gets executed, it's going to open up a window for the object that executed it. So right now, okay, so we've got the client is now open. If I go back over to Tools, you can see it reopened the same script again that I had just closed. What that means is that this got executed again. So I'm going to close it again. So now we've got no scripting there. A debugging tool that is useful is if you want to, so I'm going to go into the service and service request list. Now, so when I went to service, I go over here, you can see it's just that one thing, it opened that. So now if I go to the service request list, it's going to execute some code that I've got on the service request applets. And if we go back over to here, now you can see it's opened up two more windows. So what this tells me is that I have got scripting on those two windows somewhere. And in the web applet, I've got some scripting that executed, and in the list applet, I had some scripting that executed. And again, those were because I had pre-can invoke script in each of those. But this is a tool, knowing this is a tool so that, say, if I want to know what script happens when I press a certain button, what I can do is close all of these down, and then when I click a button, I say that button executed, but I can go back over here and see that each of these had script in them that got executed since I pressed that button. You can see that the business service has a window that's open now. The service request detail and the service request list applet all got executed. So, if you don't know if you think scripting may be being executed, that's a way to identify that there's scripting that has been executed somewhere that you may not know where. But frequently, if I don't know, if I'm not familiar with the script that's already in place, what I would do is end up going into each one of these and putting a breakpoint at every event that I'm interested in, and then go back and click on the button again, and then I can step through the code and see what the scripting is actually building in that process.
Walter, I just want to remind you we're running a little short on time.
Oh, we sure are. Okay. Thank you. I'll do is I'll just go over and show the log at this point. Since we were running in Tools, the log will come out in the log file. Since this is running in debugger mode, we can go into the log that was just created, and we should be able to go down and find the trace. There's the trace statements that we added to the log for the tracing of executing this. So we can see it started here, and then we see that it then goes to the business service, and then it ends. So there's the execution of our script in business service. One more quick thing to show you. If I go back into here and set a breakpoint, I'm going to hit F9 that turns on a breakpoint and execute this again. You'll see it executes, and I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, well, while that's cleaning up, let's go on to the next thing, and I will go back to the presentation. And we can go to the portion of this that Lanchan's going to present. So Lanchan's one of my coworkers, and he's going to present the next few slides so that we can get on to the questions and answers. So, Lanchan?
Thanks, Roger. Thanks for the presentation. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some additional training that customers and also internal support staff can take. And can go to the next slide. Yeah, if you go to this link right at the top, and there's this Oracle University, and if you go to the middle of the screen there and choose Siebel, and then click next, and then you can click the next slide, and then search for the training, let's say scripting, and we have some showing the training in Siebel 8.1. We also have some training for version 7.8 that is also available. These are instructional training that you can sign up and you get much more detail into the scripting. Okay, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, I just want to quickly talk about some of the activities I work with towards this support. And we have, right now we have this new community that is renewing, where you can post quick questions. The main idea is proactive model, support model. We started about more than a year ago, and the main task we have been doing in proactive work is trying to improve the knowledge documents, the UV facilities, and also to get better links, recommended links when you search for top documents. And proactive learning, so we also trying to provide custom information using different media such as newsletter, e-blast, Twitter, LinkedIn. This is one of the new things we are trying. And this particular community that we have in scripting tools, when you post your questions to this scripting community, you have direct contact with subject matter experts, unlimited access to a network of people, and sometimes quick questions this will be much faster than trying to create an SR. So to kind of summarize what we're trying to do in proactive support, we want to ask engineers and support teams to take full advantage of all the offerings that Oracle support. We are very proud of our support model and the functionality we can provide to our customers. We like everybody to get involved, and I'd like to see some other Siebel tools topics. Please let us know, and we'll get an expert to do the training on that field. And this presentation, of course, will also be posted to the Oracle support document. If you can go to the next slide. This is where all of our webcast will be provided. Sorry, we went over the time a little bit, and now we can, next slide, we can go to the question and answer section. Good.
Okay, thank you very much, Lanchan. We'll open our Q&A in just a moment. We hope everyone found the presentation valuable today. So, Keila, can you give instructions for those on the phone lines, please?
Yes, if you'd like to ask me a question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for a moment to compile the Q&A roster.
Okay, and you can also use the chat feature to enter your questions in. While we're pausing, I want to remind everyone of a couple of things. The first is that in the next 48 hours, I will be sending a PDF along with the download and streaming links to all those who have enrolled. Walter, you need to go back to the presentation.
Okay.
To all those who have enrolled, so be looking for that to come. And it's a good way to, if you see a webcast that you want to view, but you have a calendar conflict, go ahead and enroll for it anyway, and then you'll be pushed that PDF and download and streaming links approximately 48 hours after the presentation. Also, approximately 48 hours after, I will be posting on my Oracle support the download and streaming links. If you're more comfortable with using a doc number, they're posted, all archived advisor webcasts are posted on doc number 740964.1. And the third thing I want to remind everyone of is, if you think of a question after we end today, then just go ahead and respond to that email from me with the PDF and the download and streaming link, and I'll forward it on to Walter and Lanchin to answer on a one-off basis. So with all that said, I do have a question here. On the event sequence, are runtime events fired before the app BizConf script method or after?
Okay, I'll try and answer that now. Understand that my area is in scripting. It's actually another area that deals with the runtime events. I'm pretty sure that the runtime events run before they hit the scripting, but there may be some exceptions depending on how depending on which events you're talking about. But as a rule, the runtime events are fired first, I do believe.
Okay. Q, do you have any questions from your audience?
There are no questions.
Okay. Because we are running short on time here, I'm not seeing any additional questions. But remember, if you do think of a question after we've ended, just go ahead and respond to that email from me with the download and streaming link, and I'll forward it on to Walter and Lanchin to answer. So with that, I want to thank Walter and Lanchin and thank everyone for joining today's Oracle Advisor webcast. We hope you found this webcast valuable, and we look forward to you joining us again. Please enjoy the remainder of your day.